This is a course entitled The African Origins of Christianity, or The African Influence on Christianity. I couldn't make up my mind which one I wanted to talk about or how I wanted to title it, because actually it could be either one, and you'll see that we're going to talk about some things that we consider the origins of Christianity in Africa and influences that Africans had on Christianity. So let's go right to your notes there on page number 1. And the first question is, why teach a class about the African origins of Christianity? And by the way, you have your notes there, and you need to fill in your notes as we go along. This kind of keeps you awake and make sure you're paying attention. So why should we teach a class about African origins of Christianity? Isn't enough stuff elsewhere to teach about? Why don't we teach about Paul and teach about the resurrection? Why should we teach a class about this? Number one, isn't there a danger in bringing all of this up? I mean, okay, you bringing this stuff up, you about to start something. I mean, we don't need to be talking about this. Everything is fine. We're all getting along like a nice family. Just leave it alone. So isn't it a danger of bringing it up? One, especially in a time when the church is coming together. I don't know if you realize it or not, but we are at a place now in the history of Christianity where you see more multiracial churches, you see more multicultural churches, you see more places where there are people from all over the world that are in one place, whereas the segregation used to be a major thing years ago. It's becoming less and less of a problem. And so since we are finally getting together, why are you going to bring up this stuff about the African origins? Just leave it alone. That's one thing. Secondly, won't this only open up sore wounds? Now, some of the wounds that we have had as a result of our history and our heritage, as a result of our relationships, are things that we have had to deal with and we're finally getting over. And now you're going to bring this stuff up again, and when you bring it up, it's going to open up old wounds, bring up old hurts. Let me give you an example. Every time they play Roots on television, the police know it's going to be some fights. Every single time they play Roots on television, because, you know, you're doing okay, but then when they show for 4 hours how we have been oppressed, how we have been lynched and all of that, then somebody is going to get attitude. So what happens when we do this, when we bring all of this up, is we open up old wounds. Things, even if they haven't healed, at least we aren't thinking about it anymore. So now you're going to talk about something, you're going to bring up something, and force us to have to rethink some things and open up some wounds. So why don't you just leave that alone, because it may open up sore wounds. Thirdly, there may be a danger in bringing all of this up, because who really cares? I mean, who really cares? There are people, as has already been said, who they just want to see Jesus. They don't care what color he is. They don't care where he came from. They just want to be saved. They just want to go to heaven. They don't care nothing about it. So for them, it's, who cares? Fourthly, what difference will it make anyhow? So if we pursue this, if we find out the African origins of Christianity, if we come to the place where we begin to get an understanding of this, will it really make a difference in our faith? Will it make a difference in our lives? What difference will it make? So the first thing, as we talk about why should we even teach a course on this, is there a danger in bringing all of this up? Now, by the way, all of you should have notes. You should have notes before you. Get your notes so that you can follow along on them. All right? Is there a danger of bringing all this up? That's the first section. Secondly, why teach a class about the African origins of Christianity? First, we talked about why should we bring it up. Now we're asking why teach a class about the African origins of Christianity. Number one, because there is a clear connection between Africa and Christianity. The reason why we're teaching it is because there is a clear connection between the two. Secondly, because many people have never heard this basic information. It is entirely possible for a person to have been in the faith all of their lives and have never heard that there's a connection between Africa and Christianity. It's entirely possible for a person to be saved, sanctified, and filled with the precious Holy Ghost and never thought about there being some relationship between the continent of Africa, the beliefs of Africans, and Christian ways. And so this is giving information to people who in some ways should be enlightening and revelation because they've never had it. And the reason they've never had it is because they've never been taught it. And the reason they've never been taught it is because, number one, maybe their teachers didn't know it, and number two, maybe their teachers didn't want them to have this information. So we're doing it because we want to make sure that people who have not heard this information actually get the information. Number three, we're teaching this course because it will give us an opportunity to clear up a good deal of misinformation. Now, some people have had no information whatsoever, and other people have had a bunch of misinformation about Africans and Christianity. One of the greatest things that we have been taught, or at least has been suggested, is that Christianity is a white man's religion. And because it's a white man's religion, it's something that was handed to us by white people in a monolithic form. And if people, Africans, blacks, have a problem with white people, of course they're going to have a problem with the religion that white people gave them. And so what we need to do is clear up some of this misunderstanding, first of all, as to where Christianity came from, and secondly, what relationship do we have with that. All right? Number 5, I think, or 4 I'm on. Because it reestablishes the rightful connection between Africans and Christ. Africans and Christ. Not just Africans and Christianity, not just African thought, philosophy, religion, and Christianity. Africans and Christ. So we want to talk about what is the connection between Africa and African traditions, ways, thought patterns, and beliefs with Christianity as a faith, and then what is the connection between Africans as people and Jesus Christ as a person. So all of these are things that we want to do, and this is why we're teaching the class. Number 5, it removes the excuse from those who refuse to become Christians because they say it's a white man's religion. There are a lot of people who get stuck on that. They get stuck on that. You know, they want to believe in Jesus, but the presentation they have had across the years has been difficult for them to deal with. And we'll talk a little bit about all of the racially charged society that we have and why race is such a big deal. But there are people that all of us know who have a problem with the church. They have a problem with Christianity because of the symbols that they see, because of the theology that is preached, and because it has been seen, because of their lack of information, as something which was handed to us from Europeans, and therefore they don't want any parts of it. 6, because it provides a larger and alternative perspective from which to view both historical and current events. Now, one of the reasons why I'm teaching you this is because I want to give you a historical background and backdrop, not only to what happened thousands of years ago, but what's happening right now today. When you turn on CNN, the information that I'm going to give you will give you a better context of how all of this stuff fits together. For example, the majority culture has taken the responsibility, we have given them the responsibility, of choosing the terms of our existence. And when they choose the terms of our existence, those terms create the reality in which we live. And it does not mean that what they say is right, it's just that they choose the terms. And when we buy into the terms, we buy into their reality. For example, the term the third world. The third world is a term used to refer to Africa and developing countries like that. But that is the most ridiculous term in the world, because if Africa was first, then how does the first world end up being the third world? What they're thinking is, in the European thinking is that Europe is the first world, America is the new world, and the rest is the third world. But that's not how the way it works. Africa was the first world, Europe, if at all, was the second world, and America is the third world. So once we accept their terminology, we are already forced into thinking in a way that they make us not see ourselves where we actually belong. Here's another term, minority. In America, Africans and African Americans are considered minorities. And they are considered minorities because in the context of the American population, they are a minority. But when you look at the population of the entire world, Africans and people of color are not minority, they're in the majority. In fact, they're in the major majority. And so if we are sold a bill of goods that you are a minority, and of course the first part of minority is minus, and if you're told you're a minority, then it's not far from thinking that you're minus and not plus. And so this kind of terminology does something to you, the way that you are perceived and the way that they want you to be perceived. Here's another one, Middle East. The term Middle East is really an invention that took place less than 100 years ago at the end of World War II. That term did not exist, has not existed for 100 years. It just came up. Why? Because what we now call the Middle East used to be considered Northeast Africa. It used to be considered Africa. And before the creation of the Suez Canal, which is a canal that was cut in the Sinai Peninsula so that ships could go through there without having to go all the way around the continent, before that happened, people could literally walk from Egypt to Jerusalem. You could walk, that's how close they are. You could walk from Egypt to Israel. They are neighbors. Just like Michigan and Ohio are next to each other, Egypt and Jerusalem were physically next to each other. And we have been taught that there's such a great difference, there's such a vast difference, but culturally and geographically and historically, what we call the Middle East is a way of Europeans separating that area from Africa, when in fact it has always been a part of Africa. So for these reasons, these 6 reasons, number 1, because there's a clear connection between Africa and Christianity. Number 2, because many people have never heard this basic information. Number 3, because it will give us an opportunity to clear up a good deal of misinformation. Number 4, because it reestablishes the rightful connection between Africans and Christ. Number 5, because it removes the excuse from those who refuse to become Christians because they say it's a white man's religion. And number 6, because it provides a larger alternative perspective from which to view both historical and current events. All right? Now, let's go to the African origin of humanity and civilization. The African origin of humanity and civilization. Now, what I'm going to argue is I'm ultimately going to get to the place where I'm going to suggest and strongly propose to you that Christianity has many roots in Africa and African thought and thinking. But before I do that, I want to start by arguing that Africa is the birthplace of humanity. Let's not even talk about Christianity. Let's not talk about faith and beliefs and Bibles and script. Let's just talk about humanity. And Africa is the birthplace of humanity. And if Africa is the birthplace of humanity, then it just follows that everything that humans do at least can be traceable back to Africa. First of all, the Garden of Eden. The Garden of Eden, as described in Genesis 2, verses 8 through 15, the best definitions or the best description that we have, let's just look at that. Genesis 2, 8 through 15. The things that we are given in Genesis 2 to kind of locate the Garden of Eden, and by the way, the garden is in Eden. The garden is not Eden. The garden is in Eden, which means that gives it a lot of space as to where it could actually be. But what is used to describe the boundaries of it, if you will, are 4 rivers. And it talks about these 4 rivers where the Garden of Eden is bounded by. Okay? Let's look here. Verse 10. Verse 10 of Genesis 2. Are you with me? Now a river went out of Eden to water the garden, and from there it parted and became 4 river heads. The name of the first is Pishon. It is the one which encompasses the whole land of Havilah. Everybody say Havilah. Havilah is the name of one of the descendants of Ham, who is considered the father of the African people. So if it's the land of Havilah, whose land is that? That's the African people's land. Okay, and then it goes on, talked about the gold and all of that stuff. Then the name of the second river is Gihon. It is the one which encompasses the whole land of what? Cush. Cush is Ethiopia. Okay, and then it goes on to talk about the name of the third river, which is Hiddekel. is one which goes toward the east of Assyria, and you'll discover also one of the descendants of Ham is Ashur, from which Assyria comes, and the fourth is the Euphrates. Euphrates River, as you know, is in Mesopotamia, Babylon, you know, where Iraq and all of that is. And so when you put all these rivers together, you find that at least 3 of these 4 rivers have an association with Africa or African people. Now, we can debate and argue all day long as to the pinpoint geographic locations. They did not have a GPS system in those days, and they did not send us a digital picture. They didn't have Google where we could Google it. But the fact of the matter is that when you look at the record in the Bible, it clearly suggests that wherever Eden was, it included Africa. It included the land of Cush, which is Ethiopia. It included the land of Havilah, which is the land of people who are of African descent. Then secondly, we think about Africa as the origin of humanity and civilization, because in January the 11th, 1988, Newsweek magazine published an article entitled "In Search of Adam and Eve." I don't know if many of you remember that, but they published an article, put this silhouette of Eve on the cover of it, and some scientists discovered the remains of what they believe to be a female African person. And they did a DNA test of this female, the bones, the remains, and they found out that the DNA that these bones had is common to all the civilization. And they conjectured, Newsweek magazine, not me, not the Afro, not the Call Post, Newsweek magazine said that this person that they found was Eve, the mother of all civilization. They said that this African remains, this woman, had a DNA trait that was traceable to all humanity. And their conclusion was that all human beings began in Africa. Well, I mean, I'm just saying Newsweek said it. We all kind of know that. But they came to that. They published that. And that's one of the things that we use to support this. Then thirdly, Encyclopedia Britannica Junior. And I just picked them because I know that it's there. A few years ago, I was invited to speak for a Black History program in Grove City. It was a middle school in Grove City, and it was one of those situations where it's one black person on the faculty and 10 black students in the whole school of 900, and the faculty member just insisted that they celebrate Black History. So I'm going down there, and it was like 6 of us, okay? So I'm down there. On my way down, I had this great revelation. I called the school and asked the librarian to get me every encyclopedia that they have in their library that began with A. Began with H, by the way, began with H. And so she got them. It was about 4 or 5 of them she had. So when I get there, I'm giving my little speech about Black history and stuff, and I call up students. I said, now I need a student to help me. So I call up one. I said, well, you look in the H encyclopedia that's in your library and look up human and humanity. And the first line in just about every encyclopedia was, it is commonly accepted as fact that humanity began in Africa. I said, so now this is in your library, in your school, in your encyclopedia. I did not bring these books here. They're your books. The librarian gave them to you, and you just read them in front of these people. And so I said, so now turn to your neighbor and say, neighbor, whether you like it or not, you are of African descent. Needless to say, I have not been back there. You're of African descent. If humanity began in Africa, then if you're a human being, you are of African descent. So I use their own books to demonstrate that. And if you look that up, that's what you'll see. So let's not even get to Christianity. Let's just talk about where human beings came from. And human beings came from Africa. That's the birthplace of humanity. Then secondly, the birthplace of science, astronomy, mathematics, art, and religion. All of these came from Africa. There's a book called The Stolen Legacy by a man named George G.M. James, and the book really may be out of print now. But what his thesis was is that Greek philosophers and mathematicians were trained and educated in Egypt and given credit for simply restating what they had learned there. And if you study, for example, Aristotle, he studied in Egypt. Many of the great Greek philosophers that we think about, some of the great mathematicians, they learned what they learned in Egypt. And we only hear about them. We don't hear about their teachers. We don't hear about the time they spent in Egypt and where they got it. So civilization and all of these sciences began even in Africa. Matter of fact, Africans were so good at architecture that stuff they built 5,000 years earlier is still standing. I mean, we got some houses that have blown down in like 6 months, but they built some stuff 5,000 years ago and they're still standing. That's a monument to their genius and to their know-how. And so the birthplace of science, astronomy, mathematics, art, and religion in Africa. Secondly, Herodotus, who was the father of Greek history, said himself that the Greeks inherited from the Egyptians astrology, astronomy, geometry, the calendar, processions of solemn assemblies, processions and litanies to the gods, and almost all the names of the gods. So the father of Greek history says himself that they inherited it, they got it from the Egyptians. All right? Third thing we want to point out in terms of the African origin of humanity and civilization, the biblical view of the unity of humanity. When you look at the Bible and you see how the Bible describes where human beings came from, it describes a unity. In other words, they all came from one place. It doesn't say some was over here and some was over here. That they all came from one place. Where they come from? Adam and Eve. That's Genesis 5:1 through 32. They are the progenitors of our species, of our kind. Adam and Eve. What I'm trying to impress upon you in this part is that wherever human beings came from, they all came from one source. And that's what the unity is trying to say. And then after the flood, remember when they had the flood and all the world was drowned except Noah and his family, then the next people came from one source, Noah and his family. So here again, the unity of humanity. And then thirdly,